This is the start of a 4-part video series with James Coursier, where he breaks down exactly how he achieved financial freedom and retired at age 34. James went from 0 to $1 million in 5 years. He has grown a multi-million pound investment portfolio. He has raised multi-millions in funding and has multiple streams of income, which we'll go into detail about later. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
James, to start us off, could you give us a quick overview of the key steps that you took to retire early?
Well, as you said, I grew up poor in Birmingham, single mother. My father wasn't there, and life was a struggle. I was neurodivergent, dyslexic, and with the father wasn't there, money difficulties, going to school. It was really, really difficult to connect and engage with kids, right, who had a much easier time, let's be honest. And I distinctly remember thinking, like, I don't want this for the rest of my life. I'd look at my mum, who's an amazing woman and did an incredible job bringing me up, but she was permanently stressed around money. And so I kind of vowed at a very young age, like, I was going to address this. So I think that was all where it started. But then didn't have any really role models. Like, both my parents didn't go to university. And so I just did what society seemed to tell me was how you became successful. So I went and got good grades, went to a good university, got into a good grad scheme with EY. And I thought, yeah, great. Problem solved. I'll go join this prestigious company. They'll pay me loads of money and I'll live happily ever after. But I joined that company and very quickly realized it just wasn't for me. It was boring, the politics, it was really stressful, long hours. So I very quickly realized I needed to pivot away from this into something that was actually going to make me happy and create financial freedom so I could live the life I really wanted. And that was a big thing for me. It was be free to do what I wanted, because most people in life, right, think about it, most of their spare time is working to make money, to live. So you remove that, things change a lot. So the way I pivoted it was I moved into management consulting at EY. I started in international tax, which I really struggled with. But I knew if I moved to management consulting, I would get the core skills that would, one, make me a lot more money, two, be able to do that independently, and three, give me the skills to do my own thing, my own businesses and so on. So did that. Then once I did that for a while, I moved into freelance work. So I essentially was a management consultant, but I worked for myself. By doing that, I tripled my income, literally overnight. Did that for a few years, built up a lot of money, saved a lot, because I was able to keep my cost of living down. I had an amazing life. I was just quite sensible with how I spent money. So built up an enormous amount of savings in a very quick period of time, took that money, and I was like, well, what do I do with it? So I started in stocks, which again is pretty much all the investment advice out there, but realized it was just going to take me way too long for that kind of path. So I kept looking for alternatives, and the more I looked, the more I realized really the only reliable and effective way to retire very quickly is in property. And so that's what I did. I just started to put my money into property. I started with really simple, basic stuff, buy-to-lets in good quality, safe locations. And it kind of snowballed from there. I bought one, then two, then five, then 10, and so on. And as I started to develop more experience and confidence in property, I then moved to more sophisticated, more advanced strategies like HMOs, refurbs, below market value deals. I went into service accommodation. More recently, we're going into development deals. And that allowed me to increasingly increase my returns. And what it did was basically, as soon as the wealth that I had was producing money that covered my desired cost of living, what I started to do was just basically move away from any active income. So essentially the management consulting, which I loved, but I wouldn't do if I didn't need the money, basically. So I removed that. And then as soon as I got to about 3 times my cost of living in passive income, that was at the point when I started to really diversify out of property to really make my situation bomb-proof so it could weather any storm. And that's when I put a lot of money into stocks, gold, commodities, crypto, so that no matter what happens, something is going to be doing well. And I can draw on things even if something bad happens in the property market. And then now really the main focus is on designing my life, and I still work, I think it's important. It brings meaning and fulfillment. I just focus on things that I care about, that I'm passionate about, that I enjoy.
Nice. I love that. That is chock full of information, and there are so many different aspects to that story. But to take a step back for a moment, when you think about people in the UK economy, who can and who can't achieve financial freedom?
If you live in the Western world, anyone, pretty much anyone, can become financially free and retire early. For some people, it's more or less easy, but pretty much everyone can. It's just a question of whether you actually want it. So most people, they say, oh, I would love to be a millionaire. But really, it's a dream. If you really want this and you're committed to it and you start to spend time and attention on it, you learn how to do it, and then you start to apply the fundamentals around it, and then you do that consistently, you will become financially free and you will be able to do it much earlier than most people. Most people, even when they hit retirement age, are really struggling. So the reality of why that happens is not because it's not possible, but it's because we are not, as a society, putting our attention on that and learning the skills and then applying it. So we'll go into it in a lot more detail, I'm sure, in future videos, but very simply, with a bit of work, if you invested in property and with, sensible amounts of income, you can retire within 10 years. Now, if you want a more relaxed approach, you want to invest in something like the stock market, and you don't want to be saving in the same kind of way, you can retire like 20 years earlier than the normal retirement age if you start your career. So we'll go into the specifics, but this is absolutely achievable. It's just about learning the formula, applying it, and doing it consistently. And I want to be clear, this is not about some kind of secret formula. Yeah, it's not like buy some $10,000 course or attend some special weekend. It's just learning the fundamentals and applying it consistently. That's it. Most people don't do it because they aren't taking those steps. And that's because as a society, it's not taught. There's a lack of education. It's a bit of a taboo. We don't like to think about it. There's a negativity there. People feel very awkward around it. And if we don't put our attention somewhere, then we don't tend to do well in it.
That's super interesting. And as you said, in a later video, you'll break that down into an actionable strategy of how someone could do this or apply it to their own life. But for the moment, focusing on your story specifically, how did you go about finding and building a high income?
So ultimately, the way I made a lot of money very quickly in my job was, firstly, I learned, well, how do I get that really good job? I started with the end in mind. And I knew that if I went to one of these really good companies and got on some kind of grad scheme, they don't actually pay that well, but they give you really good experience and it looks amazing on your CV. So I just kind of didn't worry about the rest. So by doing that, I just thought about, well, what is it that they want to see? What are the boxes that need to be ticked? Did them. And then the key thing, and this is super important, is I blew them away at interview. And it's actually quite straightforward to do that. You just need to be willing to do what other people aren't willing to do, because they just interview so many people. All the applications come through and it's all just so similar. So the way I did it was I tried to be different in my application, and certainly interview. I just kind of went in with like a huge amount of energy and an enormous amount of preparation. Whereas I saw other friends of mine that were kind of throwing out their CVs everywhere, applying to lots and lots of interviews, and just kind of hoping something would stick. I applied to very, very few interviews, but the ones I did an enormous amount of work. I mean, I must have spent 100, 200 hours preparing for one interview, so that when I go there, like, I know so much and I'm so kind of excited and keen and passionate when I turn up, this person interviewing me is thinking, Jesus, like, this is nothing like anyone else I've seen today. I can't not give him the job. So that was a big thing I did. But when I then got into EY, the main thing I then did was I kind of realized actually I didn't really think end in mind fully, and saw that the original job I was in, tax, just wasn't, I didn't enjoy it. And I could see there wasn't a route through to something where I'd be making the kind of money I wanted. And that's where I said, right, okay, I need to pivot to something that I did. So that was one of the big learnings I did. So when I did that, I was like, okay, what's the best one? I looked within the firm and decided management consulting was it. And again, I did the same. I so funny. I found the internal list of all the people that worked within that team that I was applying for, and I messaged every single level 1 and level 2 person within the firm, and I met with them for coffee, because everyone within the firm is kind of willing to do that. It's happy to do that. It's like part of the thing. And I met with every single one, and I just had a really good chat with them, and I just explained the situation, built rapport. And I said, I'm applying to come in. You got any advice? And by doing that conversation 15, 20 times, by the time I got into the interview, I honestly sounded like I already worked there.
This is so good.
And I remember distinctly there was multiple stage interview, and at one it was like kind of an assessment thing where they tested me on the skills. Now I have at this point no experience in management consulting, so I kind of dead fished the assessment. And I could see the person thinking, he's not done very well at this. But because I'd done so well at everything else, I could see him thinking, well, I've got to kind of let this person through. So he was almost like helping me along this process. And so I really kind of made up with it in just enthusiasm, in conviction, in confidence, in clearly having done the work. So they just saw in me someone that really wanted this and was willing to do the work to perform and do well in the firm.
Okay, now thinking about your transition from working at EY to freelancing, what were the steps that you took? And with hindsight, what could you have done to make that move faster, and what held you back?
Okay, well, I'll explain first how I did it. So I very quickly realized that I just wasn't making that money at EY. Even though I was at a good level, they pay you in experience, not in money, in those types of firms. So I knew I needed to move to something where I was going to make a lot more money, and I wanted freedom in when I worked, with what clients I worked. I didn't want the politics, right? I wanted less stress. I wanted to enjoy myself, remote working. And so moving freelance kind of solved all of this. So the first thing I did was just build network within that world, so I could understand it, how to make the shift. It's a small world. It's hard to get into, but once you have, then it's very doable. It's quite straightforward once you kind of find out where that is and the people and all of that good stuff. So I did that. And then again, did the same thing. So when I was going for that interview, I did an enormous amount of preparation so that when this person met me, they thought, yeah, perfect. This is exactly what we want. The thing with freelancing is you're coming in and there is no training. It's not a full-time contract. They want you to land on day one, hit the ground running, add value, safe pair of hands. They cannot afford to wait for 3 months for you to onboard and make mistakes, right? Otherwise they'll just get rid of you, because these projects are quick and fast. That's why they want you rather than a permanent employee, right? So I essentially convinced them of the things that they were concerned about and that they wanted, right? So I got into the mind of the person interviewing me and thought, what is it they are looking for, rather than me just sitting there and saying, who am I about and what are my skills and my strengths and weaknesses, which is what most people do. I think what held me back, what held me back is I think I did it way later than I would have liked to. I think the main reason I got in my head that I needed to get to a certain level within EY, actually that wasn't the case, because people don't care about the level within freelance. What they care about is, can you do the job? Right. So I would have focused on how can I get to a position where I can convince people I can do the job, and I'm confident I can do the job, rather than just getting to a certain position within a career, which was really, I think, more ego based. Secondly, I I would have liked to have not worried about what other people thought so much early on in my career, and be less scared of losing my client or clients. Because once I got to a certain stage of my life where I had so much money that I didn't need the money anymore, but I was still working, I just stopped caring what people thought so much. And so when people were asking questions, I was in meetings and I was trying to solve things, I just told them what I honestly thought, even if I thought it would be unpopular or maybe they wouldn't agree with me. And they could see that, and they respected me far more for it. And actually, my career did even better following that, which is quite an ironic moment for me. And I said the last thing that I think, looking back, held me back was that I was just doing too many things at once, right? Because I was consulting for full time. I was building this property portfolio in my investments, and I was also coaching and producing content online and following my passion, my other passions. And I was just so stretched. I was working kind of 6 days a week, long hours, and it was working, and I did really well. But if I'd have kind of instead just focused on really delivering the freelance work and the building my investments only, and doing that as quickly as possible, and then once I got to a certain stage, let go of the freelance work and then focus properly on my other passions like coaching and the online content, I think I would have been much more relaxed and enjoyed the process more, and probably been more efficient and effective at it. And then the last thing I'd say is I love this concept of the courtier. So when I was working freelance work, I mean, that's how I viewed myself. And for those that don't know, the courtier is an old school term from back when you had the regal systems within big economies, and you would have these people that would be on the right hand of whoever the leader was, or leaders of the country, or big parts of the world. And their job was to build relationships, support those leaders in a way that was free from the politics of other people within the royal family, right? And that's really how I viewed myself. I viewed myself as this person that was outside of the firm. I came in and I was there to help, be a safe, reliable pair of hands, trusted, not part of the politics, was able to build a relationship, be friendly, they could get on me, they could relax around me, but I was also professional. And whatever they asked of me, I could solve, and I did it reliably. And I would be proactively looking for problems and just making their life easier. And if you think about it, if someone has got someone in their team that they can just rely on, they're friends with, they can have a chat, they can have a drink with, that person makes their life easier. That person is going to they're going to keep that person around no matter what. Because there's so few people, I think, within work that are like that. And then the last thing is, I really made sure I was irreplaceable. So I kept thinking, like, how do I embed myself in a way that whatever's going on within the firm, that I'm so valuable and I'm so helpful and I'm so critical to what's going on, that they wouldn't even think to get rid of me, because I was so important to what was important within the firm. And that allowed me to just stick through much longer than other people I saw come and go within the firm that I was working for.
That's super interesting. And now, within this journey, at what point did you discover property specifically could be an investment vehicle for building wealth?
So again, I didn't have any role models. So I knew I wanted to be financially free. I was on this mission. I was doing the standard societal norm way of, get a good job and do well in my career. And so then I started to read about investing and being financially successful and financially free, because there's a lot of content out there if you look for it. But the vast majority is just basically saying, build up a load of money, put it in the stock market, work hard, keep doing that consistently, and then retire. But what I kept seeing was that the problem with the stock market is that because it's so volatile, the amount of money that you can safely take out each year is very little. So even though the stock market the last 40 years has produced around 14% a year, the last 100 years, 10%, the amount you can safely take out, the general consensus is about 4% a year. So you need a lot of money to be able to retire comfortably and safely by just investing in something like stocks. So I started to look for alternatives, and I looked at all the alternatives out there. And every time I just kept coming back to property, because as far as I can see, it is the only strategy that you can reliably retire very quickly on. So I did that. So as soon as I realized that, I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So I just started to get my foot wet. I started to learn how do I invest in property? Like, how do I find the right one? How do I actually purchase one? How do I negotiate? All of those fundamental skills. And I just started with my first one. And as I did that, I started to learn in practice how to do it and made mistakes inevitably. But I started with quite simple ones. And as I went, I started to just do more and more and learn as I was going. And as I got more confident and I built more knowledge and experience, I started to move into more advanced ways to invest in property, which allowed me to make more and more money. And this is one of the most important reasons why property is so powerful over something like the stock market. So yes, it takes more time and effort than something like the stock market, but you can put time and effort and get better returns. In the stock market, it's almost impossible to get outsized returns in that market by putting more time in. In fact, most people who do that actually get less returns because of the human psychology involved. So by me willing to put the work in, I was able to slowly improve my returns and retire quicker. And this I think was one of the best things I did. I learned, okay, so this is how I can become financially free. This is the strategy. I'm going to apply it. And then once I saw it was possible, and I started with quite a kind of conservative approach. At the time, I think I was saving £300 a month, and my desired cost of living at the end was like £2,500, and I was just the stocks. It was all very simple. But once I could see it happen, I just basically improved it. I kind of ratcheted it up. So it was like, okay, I moved to property. I moved to more advanced property strategies. I'm going to earn even more money so that I can save even more money. I'm going to be even more consistent with how much money I spend. And by doing that, increasingly, I was able to improve how much I earned, how much I saved, and then the returns I got on my investments. And every time I did that, the time in which I could see it was going to take to retire just got faster and faster and faster and faster. Before I knew it, I was like, this is crazy. This is going to happen like in a few years, right? And really it comes down to these three core pillars: earn, save, and invest. So to become financially free, you've got to nail all three of these things. You need to be making a decent amount of money. You need to be controlling your spending so that you're consistently saving that money. And then lastly, you need to be investing that money in a vehicle where you're going to be consistently getting a good return. You do all those three, it happens. All I did was just take those three and I just kept improving them more and more and more, because the thing that was important to me was to get there as fast as possible. But I just want to be clear, like, not everyone has to go as aggressive as I did. You can get inspiration from that. But for some people, it might be, I just want to make sure I retire comfortably. Or it might be, I just want to do it in a way which is just like the little effort possible. Or I want to do it in a way where I just feel like comfortable and there's like no risk involved and it's just nice and easy. So understand what is most important to you. And then you've got to kind of set up your plan so that it meets that objective, you know. And one of my favorite phrases in the world is, you can have anything, you just can't have everything. So if you want to retire tomorrow doing no work, taking no risk, feeling comfortable and relaxed all the time, well, that's not going to happen, obviously. So of all the things that you care about, what's most important, and then focus on that.
Cool. I love that. And reflecting on that final transition from freelancer to investor, what would you have done differently given what you now know?
In this area, there's not much I would have done differently. I think I was pretty smooth in that transition. I think because by that point in my life, I'd made enough mistakes and learned enough to do it better. But I think the three key things I would have done differently is, one, I would have hired an assistant sooner, because although property, if you've done in the right way, is actually quite easy and there's not that much maintenance and management, especially if you focus on quite simple properties. But if you hire an assistant, you know, all of that admin someone else does. So you're taking something that, you know, is already amazing, and then you just remove the bits that you don't like or find boring, and then have someone else do it. So that was a massive game changer when I did that. The second thing is, for properties where I wasn't buying below market value, I would have bought 5-year mortgages rather than 2-year mortgages, because I didn't realize how much work there was involved in going from mortgage to mortgage. So I would have done that. And then obviously now with my assistant, it's pretty easy.
And we can dive into that specifically in the later part of the video series where you go into the specifics of property investing.
And then the last thing is, I would have been much simpler in my kind of non-property investing. So stocks, gold, commodities and stuff. You know, I can nerd out on these things, and a lot of people do. And the problem with complexity is it causes overwhelm, confusion, inaction. And so because of that, it was quite hard to keep track of like what was I actually invested in. And then rebalancing every year was a bit more tricky. So yes, you can get better returns and reduce your risk by setting up these more complex investment strategies, but actually it's not that much. And what's more important is that you just do it consistently, and you follow the good fundamentals, which is making sure you actually put the money in, you don't sell at the wrong time, and that you kind of check on it and you stay the course and you rebalance every now and again. And I think had I had a simpler stock market investments, that would have been easier.
Gotcha. And on that point around complexity, thinking about how you were structuring your life at that point, how did you balance freelancing, investing, coaching, all these different things that you were doing at the time?
I think I was really driven by this hunger for financial freedom. This was the first thing, is like, when you lock in on something and it becomes a must, it's not really a question of how you do it. It's just a question of when. Your mind just finds the solution. And I was very much in that mode. And so I feel that like really carried me through and gave me the energy and drive consistently. And I think a lot of people really struggle with this. So I think if you're watching this video in that kind of mindset, I think it's really important to find that hunger, find that why, that reason for you to make sure you do this, right? You know, is it because then you can help your family and, you know, make a bigger impact in this world, or like, you know, the vision of where your life will be once this is all done is like much bigger than where it is now. Like that's what was in my mind. So that's the first thing. So I just had this like hunger to kind of push through. But in a practical sense, you know, I worked pretty decent hours, not every night. I socialized loads. I made sure that I had balance in life, that I still went out, had friends, you know, was still meeting the other areas that were important in my life, right? But at the same time, on those days I wasn't socializing, I worked longer hours. I worked through till the evening, and I worked every Sunday. But I kept it more chilled on a Sunday. I did non-urgent stuff because otherwise you're just stuck in this urgent trap, and that feels very stressful. So on Sunday, that was the stuff when I did like, the online content, or I was reflecting on, I was looking at my situation and the things that were like important but weren't gnawing at me. I made sure I consistently got good sleep. So even though I was working pretty long hours, I always made sure I finish early enough to get home, relax, have a few hours before bed, and then get enough time in bed. And then I made sure I enjoyed what I did, or enjoyed most of what I did, because when I'm doing that, what I'm doing is giving me energy. So I'm getting the energy of the day, and although I'm tired, I also feel pretty energized, and I feel like I'm looking forward to getting up the next day and going again and going again. If that was the opposite, then I don't think I would have been able to push through as I did. And then finally, and this is maybe a bit more controversial, but I like to mix work and play and friends within work. A lot of my business partners, in fact, all my business partners are friends of mine. And a lot of what I do, it's not really clear whether it is work or play. And so by doing that, even though I was working quite hard and working a lot of hours, it also felt like I was spending a lot of time hanging out with friends and doing things that were fun and enjoyable. So it was a bit of a hack.
That's cool. And I like that last piece around essentially the work that you do is with people that you like and respect and get energy from. And now the point you mentioned earlier about rebalancing your investment portfolio, let's dive into the nerdy details of how, as your priorities in life have changed, you've changed the structure of your investment portfolio.
Well, that changed over time, right? So at the beginning, it was all about once I landed on what I was going to do to become financially free, right, which is property. It was all about, the main focus was property. So 80-90% of my money was in property. And that's because I'm in this believer of this kind of philosophy of attack and defense, right? So think about it like, so you're at 0 meters altitude, right? And financial freedom is at 1,000 meters altitude, right? And you want to get there as quickly as possible, or at least that's what I wanted. So what I'm trying to do is I'm building this tower that's going to get me to 1,000 meters. And property is my attack. That's the thing that's going to build me right up as quickly as possible. Okay. And so I'm putting all my money into that, and I'm trying to get as best returns as possible on that. And I'm trying to improve the returns and the reliability of those returns, right? So I'm focusing on that, right? But the problem is, if you just build a tower straight up, right, and just focus on speed of height, it kind of is all very thin and it's a bit unstable. So the defense is like the ballasts, it's the foundations, right? And so that for me was stocks and other types of things like that, where you just press a button on a screen, right, and own something rather than a physical asset like property. And so at the beginning, most of it was in property to get there as quickly as possible with a bit of foundations. But then once I got there, I increasingly built out those foundations to create strength, and increasingly I could weather stronger storms, So I could weather a winter, or I could weather a 1 in every 10 years winter. And I could weather a kind of a free once in a lifetime winter, right? So at the beginning, it was kind of an 80-20, 90-10 split between property and other stuff. Once I became financially free, I then started to increasingly move my money towards those other types of assets to create more diversification. And now, it's more of a kind of 2-to-1 split. So, every £2 of property to £1 not in property. And, I can go into the various things. So in property, I started with just very simple stuff. So just a normal buy to let in, a safe area in the middle of a city centre like London or Manchester or Liverpool. And then as I got more experience in confident property, I then went into refurbishments, HMOs, service accommodation, below market value deals where there's some kind of problem or issue that needs fixing to then realize the full value. And then development deals. So that's when you're getting planning and you're converting something into flats and these types of things. And then the real power is when you start to combine these strategies, right? And you get a multiplier. So, right, like if you're getting a 20% improvement because you're doing a refurb, and then another 30% improvement because it's below market value deal, and then another 40% improvement because it's an HMO, and then you do them all together, it's a 20%, it's a 1.2 times 1.3 times 1.4, and then all of a sudden the returns just get silly. So that there's a real power in combining stuff like that. And then within investing in what I call the markets, and that's essentially something you do kind of through an investment platform like Fidelity or Hargreaves Lansdown or something like that, where you're pressing a button and buy something. I started off obviously with stocks, which is the main thing, and bonds, but then very quickly realized that I didn't like bonds, especially within this market. So I looked at other things that I could diversify into, give me more protection, smooth the curve in my returns, but at the same time, also actually gave me an expected return, unlike bonds. So we're in what we call stagflation at the moment. So we've got persistent high inflation and we've got persistent low economic growth. In that type of market, there's things that tend to do better. Gold, commodities, value stocks. That's just stocks that reliably produce a return now rather than an expected return in the future.
Do you have an example of a value stock versus something that isn't?
Yeah, growth stock is like Amazon. So the value of the stock is based on what you think it will do in the future, right? Its value in the future. Whereas a value stock is something like Costco, Walgreens, Coca-Cola, right? Their value is in the fact that they are reliably producing strong revenue and profit now. And that profit comes into the company and it can be paid out into shareholders either by an improving value of the shares or through dividends. So, when you've got high inflation, it gets a bit complex, but if you get high inflation, it means that money in the future is worth less. So money now is relatively worth more. So value stocks tend to be better. So essentially what I did was invest in different things that tended to benefit from how we're doing now, and just have lots of different things so that even if something doesn't do well, you've got other things that are doing well, right? So roughly speaking at the moment, I've within property to stocks is a 2-to-1 split. And then within say stocks or the markets, I've got 70% roughly in stocks, 10% in gold, 10% in commodities, and 10% in crypto. The crypto's there because, well, there's a lot of reasons why that should be improving, but there's no way I would put more than that in because it's just too unreliable. There's so many reasons why it may not do well in the future, and I certainly wouldn't want to put all my eggs in that basket, and I think it's very dangerous to do so. And then within stocks, mostly in the US, but so it's probably around 70% the US stock market, 10% developed, 10% emerging, and then 10% value. And that value is the US. Although that sounds really US centric, the US is where most of the stock market is already. It's actually a 60-30-10 split, with 30% being developed, 10% emerging. So essentially what I've done is I've had an overemphasis in the US stock market, and that's because the US is the world leading power, has that competitive advantage, and has historically performed much higher as a result. So I put more into the US stock market because the expectation is I'm going to make a better return from that. But I don't want all my money in the US stock market, right? Because if in the next 10 years, China becomes the next leading power, the US starts to fall away, other markets do well, I don't want to be stuck with everything in there.
Cool, that makes sense. And I love the build up from the start of your career into these like increasingly complex investment strategies. And I think leads really nicely to the topic of the next video, where James will be going through what are the top mistakes that people make on their journey towards financial freedom, drawing on both his own experience, but also the experience of other people that he's met, networked with, and coached.